think for one moment about what is around you. Everything around you was invented by someone in some place at some time. Since technology is so ubiquitous, we tend to take this for granted. So in this video, we're going to look at technology and its possible effects on human life through the lens of Karl Marx. It's indeed hard to imagine a world without technology. From the invention of the wheel to the modern spacecraft, we humans find ways of manipulating our environments with the ever-present pursuit of technological innovation. Unfortunately, only few have theorized the relationship between humanity and technology in any in-depth way. Of those few thinkers, however, is Karl Marx, who is perhaps the most insightful and original critic of humanity's dependence on technology. Inspired by Darwin's theory of evolution, Karl Marx thought that technology was a key factor in the evolution of human ideology. However, unlike biological evolution that is more or less linear, Marx observed the pace of technological evolution to be radically exponential, meaning that the pace of technological evolution actually accelerates over time. In other words, the more we progress technologically, the faster we invent new technologies. Writing during the mid-19th century, Marx thought that the unrelenting evolution of technology created severe transformations to our material world, and he wondered what the consequences of such transformations actually were. So he devoted himself to answering a few questions. First, how does the material world impact human ideology exactly? And second, how does technology constitute our material world? And can such technology actually affect our ideas, values, and morals? Marx was writing during the Industrial Revolution, a time of great technological innovation that caused explosions of capital growth, driving the economic system we know today as capitalism. In this new machine-driven capitalist era, goods could now be manufactured cheaper and faster than ever before. And given the advent of new methods of transportation, like the steamship and railways, those goods could now be shipped and sold around the world for the very first time. As a result, wealth began to be accumulated in groups of individuals acting as single legal entities, coining terms like corporation and companies for the first time. Soon after all these developments, certain parts of the world, namely the West, were thrust into the late stages of advanced capitalism and globalization, and the world itself became one giant global marketplace. Yet, despite the promises of wealth within the new capitalist world economy, Marx saw drastic changes to our material environments. The rural village that once was being replaced by the large metropolis, where skilled labor was giving way to armies of assembly lines, conveyor belts, automated machines, hydraulically powered hammers, and of course, the steam-powered engine. Technology was changing our world and the habitat in which we live. Marx was certain that new technologies associated with the automated machine reached farther into human values than one might think. He was convinced that human ideology, which is also known as the totality of a person's morality, ethics, religion, aesthetics, beliefs of socialization, values, customs, spirituality, ideas about law and philosophy, etc., all of these were actually products of our material surroundings. In other words, the new material forms of life, literally powered by the advancements of the machine, drastically influenced the way people think. He called this idea materialism, or the idea that our material condition actually shapes our collective ideology. Connected to this idea is another concept, historical materialism, or the idea that as material life changes throughout history due to the inevitable technological advancements that follow, humans change their ideologies to adapt to their new material realities. In other words, it's not that human ideologies change and evolve naturally on their own over time. Instead, it's that they simply follow the curve of technological progress in dependent ways. As our material world changes, our thoughts and ideas also change. We'll come back to historical materialism in a minute. First, in order to understand Marx's idea of materialism, we must first look at what inspired it: Hegel's idealism. Hegel thought that ideologies are the driving force of history, technological progress, and material change, such that in order for our material world to progress and evolve, as it has since the dawn of time, progress must be caused by an evolution of some internal human spirit. He suggests there's a consistent spirit within humanity that is evolving, bringing with it more and more refined visions of justice, ethics, knowledge, science, and rationality. In sum, Hegel interprets history as a story of progress of the human mind and the human spirit. The material world is but an after effect of such natural human ideological evolution. For example, given Hegel's thought, we might divide human history into various ideological stages, beginning with, say, early hominids, and then progressing to hunter-gatherer tribes, then on to ancient, feudal, and modern societies, and finally, perhaps, a postmodern society, to illustrate how human society and its ideas have evolved over time. Even if you agree with Hegel that human history is a story of progress, there still remains a philosophical problem within Hegel's thought. If ideas constitute our material world, like this diagram shows, then where do our ideas actually come from? Hegelians refer to something called dialectics, or systems of movement based on a thesis, which comes into conflict with an antithesis, resulting in a synthesis, which therefore becomes the new thesis. So for Hegel, dialectics propel the evolution of human ideas and human history. In sum, dialectics are basically an inherent learning process. Marx agreed with Hegel's dialectical view of history, that history doesn't move in random directions, but instead follows a clear path of progress. But what Hegel got wrong is the direction of causation. For Marx, it wasn't that our ideas create our material world, but rather it was that our material world actually creates our ideas. Put differently, Marx inverted Hegel's idealism by replacing it with a materialist view of history, whereby the material condition of a society makes possible a specific ideology that follows. In the preface to the Critique of Political Economy, Marx famously writes, "The production of ideas, of conceptions, of consciousness is at first directly interwoven with the material activity and the material intercourse of men, the language of real life. The phantoms formed in the human brain are also, necessarily, sublimates of their material life process, which is empirically verifiable and bound to material premises. Morality, religion, metaphysics, all the rest of ideology and their corresponding forms of consciousness thus no longer retain the semblance of independence." What Marx is saying here is that there is no such thing as pure or independent ideas. All of our ideas and beliefs about literature, fashion, religion, art, war, legal values, and our political institutions, among many others, are in fact only renditions of our material condition. Our consciousness about who we are and how we think we should live is ultimately a reflection of the technological environment in which we live. But what about capitalism? Where does capitalism fit into Marx's theory of materialism? Because after all, he's known as the biggest critic of capitalism. Economic systems like capitalism are actually outgrowths of certain technological environments, something we'll turn to now. First, let's visualize society with the following flowchart. As you can see here, there are various levels of society. Marx refers to the bottom portion as the base, and the very top portion, the social ideological portion, the superstructure. Let's begin at the very bottom of the base. At the very bottom are raw materials and technology, which work symbiotically and form the foundation of society. Every society has certain materials it has access to, like wood, metals, and minerals that are necessary to build with. Those raw materials ultimately give us certain technologies. For example, having access to steel made certain tools possible to make, and having access to silicon made microchips possible. So without those raw materials, we couldn't have those technologies. So raw material makes certain technologies possible, and without them, impossible. To the right is technology itself. We can define technology as any material object that improves the efficiency, precision, and/or productivity of certain human tasks. So, for example, the mechanical hammer replaced the human hand because it was much faster, much more precise, and much more productive than manual labor. This is a very broad category and includes even primitive technologies like the wheel or spear in very early human societies. And of course also includes highly advanced technologies like AI robots in our current society. And just as raw materials make certain technologies possible, as we saw before, technology also makes access to certain raw materials possible to harvest. So for example, think of modern drill bits that dig through hard sheets of bedrock to extract rare minerals beneath them. So overall, Marx refers to this bottom level of society as the, quote, means of production. Both raw materials and technology form the material base of society, which then produces a specific type of economic system, which we'll move on to next. A society's economic system is actually a direct reflection of the type of technology and raw materials available to that society. So, the more sophisticated the technology and materials available to that society, the more sophisticated the type of economic system it will need. Likewise, a primitive society will thus have a primitive economic system, because that is all it needs. After all, it would be quite weird for a society like ours, that is able to launch, say, a spacecraft to Mars, to have as its economic system a primitive system of bartering. In the case of modern society, capitalism is our economic system, not by choice, but by necessity, since we have highly evolved technology and raw materials. No other economic system could support it. In sum, the economic system is always in relation to the material base of society. Once an economic system is established, it produces a particular class system known as the social relations of a society. The class system arranges people into hierarchical groups, marked by their relationship to the means of production. That is, those who own the means of production and those who do not. Or we could say the winners and losers of the economic system, so to speak. And lastly, at the very top is the ideology of a society. This encompasses the general cultural belief system of a society, the totality of its social consciousness mentioned before. The overall idea in this diagram is that each level of society, beginning at the bottom, conditions the level above it, with technology and raw materials at the very foundation of society itself. To briefly describe this model, we can say the following. Our views of humans, nature, and the world are shaped, molded, and reinforced by a class system that underpins it, which is itself a product of a specific economic system, which furthermore can be traced back to a certain technological base. This is why it's not possible to say we are, quote, free thinkers from a Marxist perspective. Our imaginations are intrinsically conditioned by the material base of society. Let's take a more interesting example like capitalism. As steel and oil became ubiquitous materials to use in industry, certain forms of technologies quickly developed. In this case, factories, locomotive trains, steamships, and the automated machine. From those technologies, it produced an economic system that could support commerce at large scale and magnitude, the modern capitalist economy based on free trade and private property. The economic system generates a division of people between classes: the capitalists, who own the means of production, and the wage laborers, who own nothing but their own labor, which they rent out to the capitalist for a wage. From that particular class system comes a, quote, capitalist ideology that is consistent with the values of the market economy. In the capitalist example, it generated new ideas of private property, freedom, secularism, constitutionalism, individualism, and supply and demand values. In addition, it created a complex legal, political, and banking framework that protected the property of capitalists who were benefiting from the system. Although this model might seem quite neutral, as I've been describing it, for Marx, this whole model is extremely political. Remember, Marx thought that the class system directly reproduced the social ideology. But also remember, the class system itself is always divided between the powerful and the powerless. Because of this, Marx didn't think our ideologies were neutral like Hegel, but instead, our imaginations are continually manufactured by a ruling class. That those in power are ultimately those who decide the superstructure. Marx famously writes, "The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. That is, the class which is the ruling material force in society is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The class which has the means of material production at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it." Marx is saying that ideology, again, our morals, ethics, codes of behavior, beliefs of law, religion, views of beauty, etc., they are all tools used by the powerful. Those in the capitalist class created ideologies that serve their own interests. The ruling class creates ideas, norms, and ethics to legitimize their privileged status and to keep themselves in power. Those who aren't part of the capitalist class are thus not part of the intellectual class, and are thus only ideological consumers, and those who are part of the intellectual class are thus its ideological generators. So, the wealthy don't only make the decisions, but they also control how we think.